Hello, everyone, and today we are joined by Scott Rogerson, who is the CEO at UpContent. And UpContent is consistently recognized by G2 as being the market leader within content curation software. So their platform allows you to easily discover, collaborate, and distribute relevant third-party content across your various channels. Scott, I'm really excited to have you here. Actually, welcome to today's show.
Yeah, likewise, Dylan. Thanks for having me.
No problem. This is going to be a good one. Today, we're going to talk specifically about how you at UpContent are selling to the enterprise market without having built an enterprise sales team. Now, I know you fairly well. We've worked together for quite a while now. I know a good amount about the UpContent story, but some people listening to this might not. So let's cover that from a top level first. Now, I mentioned content curation software platform. Some people will know what that is. Some people maybe won't. So why don't you give like a quick overview of who UpContent are, what you guys do, and the kind of position that you guys are at within the business right now?
Yeah, sure. So that content curation evolution has been happening alongside of the growth and evolution of UpContent. And our focus is helping organizations, as you mentioned, find those relevant third-party articles and utilize them in a non-licensed way. So a lot of times we get somewhat confused with licensing programs or syndication programs or even writing original content. But our focus is providing a platform to sales, marketers, HR teams to really easily discover the content that matters most to them and get it out to both their internal and external audiences through the tools they already know and love, utilizing any device they choose to do so, and collaborating with those inside of their teams who know the most about those topics in order to really position themselves and their companies as experts in those industries and build a bit of that empathy and understanding between them and their prospects, that they know what's going on inside of their prospects' worlds. UpContent initially got started when I was running a marketing agency, really as a tool just for us to use to make sure that we could be more efficient in how we were doing that activity for our clients. We launched it inside of Hootsuite initially back in 2015, which I think is where you and I first ended up connecting with each other. And that was really because that was the tool our team was using, and we didn't have the capital to build a front end ourselves. And we grew inside of there, utilizing it ourselves, saw some other users start to utilize it outside of our agency. And then in 2017, made the decision to spin out UpContent into its own organization and had to be, I think, very judicious about what our strategy was of how we were going to grow UpContent. Because as Dylan, we are a component part to the overall ecosystem. We're not going in and selling an ERP package where we can afford a huge cost of sales process. And we really work best when we're fitting in with programs or solutions that the customer is already using that we know this is going to work well within. And so somehow finding that way to thread the needle as almost a reverse ecosystem has been a key pillar of our strategy, and I think a key reason why we've been able to grow.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for the intro for everyone that's like watching and listening to this. I know that they'll be interested. It's funny when you mentioned when you first got started building within the Hootsuite ecosystem. That's when we first met. That feels like such a long time ago now. Right?
It does.
I can't even remember how long ago that was, but it feels like forever.
Yes. So, much has changed.
Yeah. So I'm really interested to talk. I know a little bit later on when we dive into how you guys are selling to enterprise without having an enterprise sales team. We're going to talk about some of the kind of co-marketing and then partnerships and reselling that you guys leverage and are working through. And I know that some of that is going to tie into the strategy around Hootsuite and other platforms as well. So that's going to be really fascinating to jump into. Before we do that, maybe just set the scene a little bit in terms of you've managed to keep the team, like you guys at UpContent are a very small, lean team. And
yes.
As you said, that's very interesting for enterprise like sales. Usually we have these huge sales teams or anything else. So we will get into the specifics of that, but maybe share with us a bit more about what the team looks like at the moment and some ideas around where the business is at.
Yeah, I'll start on the other side. So on the business side, we have about 450 paying organizations utilizing UpContent. You'll see there is a freemium offer. So there's also another few hundred that are utilizing it on a consistent basis within our free plan. Usually those are individuals or tire kickers trying to see if this is going to match what they're looking to do longer term. We also have a Wix app that's fully self-contained within Wix that utilizes the same underlying engine of UpContent called Easy Content. And we've got a few hundred additional customers paying for that app. And we add about 800 new customers on the free plan within Easy Content on a monthly basis as well. So altogether, paying customers about 500, and those range from all of the different pricing areas that you on our site, so $15 a month to $260 a month. We also have the enterprise, which we've been consistently growing, particularly over 2020, that can go up to 14K, 20K a year, utilizing really the same platform and just putting the building blocks together differently. So success and support is really important to us in all of those areas. That's something that I think has allowed us to build trust with those customers and achieve that, both with the smaller customers and enterprise. And we're achieving that today with a team of 3. We're looking to grow that team over the next few months, but certainly not growing from 3 to 30, growing from 3 to 5 or 6 maybe over the course of the rest of the year.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's so cool. It's quite unusual, not unusual, but usually in a marketing focused business, people will have these larger marketing teams and sales teams and everything else. One thing that I've always found interesting about the way that you guys have it structured is so lean at the moment, which must be beneficial when you're going through these like building phases too, because you don't have those huge overheads.
Yes.
Other people
certainly makes us dynamic. Yeah, we can definitely bob and weave with the best of them in that. And I think it's helpful as well by having a small team that leaves a lot of opportunity for me to stay in direct contact with our customers, both on the sales side and in the success side. Now, we have Dylan on our team who leads all the success efforts, and he's fantastic. But it's always helpful to regroup with those individuals over time, see what issues they're having, which luckily isn't always a lot. But what we do hear a lot is I would love to also be able to do this, or do you also integrate with that tool? Or I came up with this neat idea of how I can use these articles that I found in UpContent. What do you think about a way to do that? That's always the most exciting part of the day, is coming up with some of those new areas. And if we had a bigger team, there's certainly benefits to that, but I think we would lose a lot of that translation up to prioritization of those initiatives by not necessarily hearing it directly from them.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay. And then, so I know that 2020 for you guys so far, and in the build up to this too, there's been this, I don't know if shift is the right word, but there's been more of a focus on the enterprise, like moving more up market. I think it's pretty natural for a lot of SaaS businesses during their growth. They go through this period, right, where there's the larger deal sizes, the more hand holding that goes on, bigger business to be won. Now, that's what we're going to be talking about today, and how you're starting to grow this business out without having this huge enterprise sales team. So maybe let's get started with that, because you touched on the volume of freemium users that you have and the kind of self-service lower tier plans. And then there's been a good volume of success for you guys with the enterprise market so far this year. So
yes,
where do we get started with that? And maybe a good place to begin might be with some of the co-marketing and reselling and building off the back of, I don't know if Hootsuite specifically was one that you wanted to go down the route of, but obviously with the UpContent platform starting out within the Hootsuite kind of ecosystem and marketplace, maybe we could expand as to what that journey has looked like as you've started to move more up market, and then we can go into kind of co-marketing with other platforms too off the back.
Yeah, absolutely. And first thing to say, we love our non-enterprise customers still. They're fantastic. We value them just as much as the enterprise side, but it's obviously a different approach to speaking to the enterprise audience. And while the use case may be similar, obviously the deployment is far different. And so one of the things I think, beyond us feeling like we said, okay, now we're going to move to enterprise, which kind of from the outside always seems like that's what happens with organizations. They just wake up one day and they're like, okay, let's move up market now. We feel like we've done enough here. Really what ended up pulling us, I think, up market was a lot of the transition as well to the use of third-party articles outside of just traditional marketing, inside to more of the merging between marketing and sales. On the relationship side, we see a lot of the social selling, all of that digital sales activity. And that's been certainly exacerbated in recent months as everything has translated to digital. And so what we're seeing more now than ever is that organizations are looking at their content mix and saying, okay, we can't just sell all the time. And maybe they don't always want to listen to what we have to say. We need third-party content. I think last year at this time, many of those organizations would still be only looking at the original content that they're writing and thinking that is good enough to achieve what they're looking for, because relationships were built in person in those cases. And so that certainly, I won't take full credit and say we just had this desire to move up to enterprise. We were seeing the need, and that certainly helped move us toward the enterprise. But a few of the building blocks I think that you touched on that made that possible were the partnerships that we've formed over past years with organizations that do traditionally sell to enterprise. And we've great relationship with the team at Hootsuite still. As I mentioned, they were our first love that we introduced into. So we've known that group since 2015 and all the permutations there. More recently, we have been working with HubSpot, and they're a great partner as well. And a number of other organizations, number of other technologies that enterprises are using that UpContent can then fit within. And that ability for us to say yes to the enterprise without them feeling like they have to change 3 or 4 or 5 things has certainly helped us address that. To your point around the enterprise sales process, we like to see ourselves and really position ourselves with those enterprise larger platforms as an amplifier of the value that they're already providing. And so we have done a lot of work instead of building out our own team to try to build really strong personal relationships with the sales teams in those organizations, and then start to put around some larger actual infrastructure around that beyond just, hey, we like Scott, we'll bring it up next time. It definitely started there in a lot of cases, but then continuing to support them and then make sure that those customers were successful so that they felt like rock stars for bringing UpContent into that opportunity, because it made their churn go down, their contract value go up, got more referrals, whatever that may be. We found that is the best case for us to achieve the enterprise. And then we can certainly, with the ecosystem, if we're brought in from a social selling standpoint, we can then obviously expand within that organization and talk about use in email marketing or use on the website or use for learning and development internally, and then bring in other partners into that as well. And obviously that reciprocity makes everybody happy.
Yeah. And how, for people listening to this that are trying to go through a similar process to, I don't know if make the transition is the right term, but people that are going through this process trying to build those relationships so that they can have that kind of time from these businesses. I know that with Hootsuite, you spent a long time building that relationship, because that's, as we said, that's when we first met. And that must have been at least, I don't know, maybe even 3.5, 4 years ago, I feel. And you've seen significant progress with that relationship over the last couple of years. So that's something that's clearly had a lot of time and effort and energy into it. I know that you have successful kind of partnership relationships with HubSpot, as you mentioned, and a few others too. When whether it's now or in the last year or a few months, whatever it is, when you're looking at, okay, we've identified these are the potential partners where we could actually just support their customers better, because I think that's the number one step, right? It's identifying who those partnership opportunities are where you can actually bring in and add value instead of just going for all of the biggest names that you can think of, whatever. Once you've done that, what has your approach been to try and get on their radar? Is it purely that relationship building play that you're talking about? And if so, how did you go about that, and how do you go about that? Do you identify a partnerships manager and try and get to know them? I'm interested what that looks like.
That's a really great question, and I hope you'll be equally enthusiastic about the answer. But it's much more of a using the customers as that golden key to get in. So we have a very unsophisticated Google sheet, and so mostly Dylan and I are working on the sheet. So when we're listening, which I think is probably the biggest piece, to our customers, hearing how they're utilizing those tools. When they mention a technology, they say Salesforce, we then make sure that we understand and keep track of the fact that customer is also utilizing UpContent inside of Pardot in some way. And then we look to see how many of those customers keep building up. That then becomes, once we feel like we've got 20, maybe 30 customers, we'll take that kind of group of understanding and go to that organization then. Usually working through, what we found works well is through the success side of that organization on the customer success piece, because they're looking for more answers to solve their current customers' problems, more so necessarily than just selling net new contracts and accounts. So we don't necessarily go to the sales side first and say, hey, let's joint sell this together. Usually go to success and say, hey, we've found these 30 customers that are having this challenge that they solved utilizing UpContent and your technology. Shouldn't we do something to reduce some of the friction in getting things from point A to point B? MailChimp was a really good example of how we moved through those processes with them, and really just asked questions more than made statements to the
Okay.
success group of, what do you think? Would this work? Getting their opinion on things. They're going to know far better than you will. And I think what we've found is that if you approach with a, we should do this, that's a very easy email to ignore because it looks like a to-do for them on their list. If we approach more so in more of a question, hey, we've got these customers. Certainly it helps to have other names that you've worked with. So the first one of those outreach attempts was really time consuming to make
Right.
happen. And we felt like we were banging our head against the wall. But as you get more and more relationships, you can, and you treat those relationships where you can leverage those to build other ones. So that's been really important. And it also allows us to then take that new opportunity or new partnership back immediately to our 20 or 30 customers and say, hey, we've now created this because we listened to you. That gets them to now create that cycle where they're going to then share more. And it allows us to talk to that partner and say, hey, you've got these 20 other customers now who are even more happy than they were before because we achieved this together. From there, we then move into, hey, are there other customers out there that would get a benefit from this? And that's when we start moving into more of the traditional partnership or sales discussions.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's really great advice actually for everyone, because I think the natural route to go down is like reaching out to maybe a partnerships team or something and asking about, hey, how do you work on partnerships with people? How do we get involved? And I can see that flipping that entirely and taking the approach that you guys do makes so much more sense from anyone that's receiving an email where it's like, hey, this is a problem that your customers have, and this is how we can help you support them to fix it,
Right.
kind of thing.
Right.
Makes it a lot more enticing for them. I'm sure it maybe varies depending on the companies that you're speaking to, but sometimes what does that initial kind of step look like? Because it, like, if you share that with them and they're like, oh yeah, this looks great, this is something that we can work with. I know there's different roads to go down. There's like maybe improved integrations. There's the kind of co-marketing, the reselling. Do you have something that you go for first, or do you just wait to see how they respond? Are you always thinking, okay, the first step is we want to do some co-promotion together, or the first step is we want to try and build a special, I don't know, like bundle for them and their customer, their team? Like, is it as simple as that, or is it really depending on each individual use case?
Yeah, we try to treat them like our boss, meaning that we don't just come with an answer of, hey, what do you think we should do? We try to come with, we think it could be this option or this option would be best, and here's why we think that. What do you think is best out of those two? Because it makes it easier for that person to then respond and give an answer. If we say, what do you think this best partnership between UpContent and ABC SaaS tool would be? They'll be like, man, I don't have time for that. This is great. I have a million other things going on. I don't really have time to sit and think about how your tool can best fit into our platform. But if we go back and we say, like you said, we've got these 20 customers, here's how they're currently using it. We've looked at your API documentation, if that's available already. We've already looked at how some other partners have integrated with you. We've seen what you've done here. And we think, given our past experience and these customers, we should have a OAuth integration that connects to one of our collections, meaning that when somebody puts an article into it, it's going to do X, Y, and Z inside of your technology. Or we just talk about them together because we're not yet ready to make that determination. What do you think is the best way to go? And they'll usually respond to that. And to your prior point, we certainly made the initial mistake with our first kind of partnership process to say, oh, wow, you've got an app directory. Can we be part of that app directory? Right. And everyone's like, sure, you can. Like, whatever, that's fine. Here you go, build it. And then you build it and you're like app 185. And
right.
Then it's all back on you to make that happen. And we failed to build the reason why we were putting that on there and the joint value and know how to reach out to customers. We've definitely gotten a bit wiser just through falling on our face a number of times in those early days.
Yeah, and I think that's why this is such a valuable episode, because I think most people will take that route of wanting to just join the app directory and then nothing happens unless they've got something that's completely different to everything else on there that loads and loads of people want. If just getting placed on the app directory isn't going to all of a sudden explode the business overnight, or very rarely is that going to happen anyway.
And it's even worse because now you've got something else that you need to maintain and support, because if you don't do that well, now you have something that when you go back to that partner and try to build that relationship further, they're going to look at how your app has performed over the last 6, 9, 12 months. And if they're not seeing activity, that's an immediate reason for them not to talk to you, because they're seeing that then as there's no joint value here, because you had it out to our customers and no one's done anything with it, versus trying to approach it first and really do it in a way, quote unquote, what we found to be most effective of building that kind of mutual understanding. How are we going to talk about this together? And really going with them and saying, does this make sense? We don't actually know if this makes sense. And that lets them be more open and honest too, versus feeling like they're going to have to disappoint you and saying that it doesn't work out of it.
Right. Yeah, no, that's awesome. Okay, thank you for sharing that. And then I know that we had the co-marketing, reselling, leveraging partners. I know that these kind of all tie into each other as well. But I think one of the areas where you're seeing success more recently too is from the reselling side, right? Like working with the enterprise teams at some of these larger companies that you're partnering with to come in and be involved in deals that they're working on. Maybe could you give some insight as to what that looks like for you guys, or how that's evolved and what's worked well for you from that perspective?
And certainly, I think that tiering is certainly how we've experienced it. We have to sit next to each other in class for a while, and then you go get lunch together, and then you're going to get dinner, and then you're going to meet each other's friends, and then you're going to start reselling together after that. And it takes time. And I think we had reselling relationships to target enterprise customers probably on every annual plan since 2017. And I would say we probably didn't actually achieve that until late last year, most really early this year, to be able to reach that reseller potential, just because it does take time to make that happen. But that's really just the starting line. We've certainly realized as well. Once you've got that reseller agreement set up, that does not mean, just like getting on the app directory, you can just sit back and be like, this is all going to be taken care of now. This great team who's international, 600 or so people, they're just going to go sell UpContent into everything they do, and I'll just sit back and bask in my success and glory. That doesn't actually happen that way. So what we've certainly then is said, okay, great. Now, as we said in the beginning, our focus is to not necessarily build out our whole team, but have those sales team members, whether they're account executive roles or solution consultants, feel we're part of their team, not that they're part of our team, which I think is a very important distinction to make of how you position that. They're not selling for us. We're supporting them in selling. And by doing that, we're participating in demos when they ask us to, helping to build out those decks or those value propositions in their branded way that has very minimal UpContent statements being made, or you won't see purple, unfortunately, anywhere, even though I like seeing purple on those slides. But it's all kind of positioning them for them and achieving it that way. Our focus has been enabling them. We're actually starting to now build out those resources for a more asynchronous enablement process. But first, just like with the customer side, our goal was to better understand how we can be a part of that process. And then from being a part of that process, we can make sure that we're understanding those insights and those lessons learned and now translating them into something that is more consistent.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. It's super interesting because it seems obvious, but I think most people are, as you said, just too much trying to rush into these things. Because I remember when I was at Hootsuite and when we were selling, like when I was selling to enterprise companies there, we had so many other like potential partners that we could bring in to deals, depending on, of course, like what the client needs and what they want. But it would be, we would need that encouragement sometimes to bring them in, whether it's because of, okay, this is the perfect fit for this client, so we're thinking of bringing this partner in. Honestly, sometimes it was just like, hey, we really love working with these guys, so let's just try and sell them to this customer as well, because they look after us and they'll like take us out once every couple of weeks, or they're really cool when they come into the office. So I can see how if someone came into one of these relationships and then just eased off, I can imagine actually very little would happen unless there was a client that particularly said, hey, I have this very specific need. Because what you want is you want the sales teams at Hootsuite, at HubSpot, at everywhere else to be like coming to their clients with the suggestion of, hey, this is something that is part of our stack that can support you, rather than them being reactive to the problems. And I think that's where the things start to pick up and move towards the next level, right? Is when you get them being the ones that are leading rather than just being reactive.
That's exactly right. And it certainly didn't start with a signed agreement. Here's the organizational relationship. It started more so as that integration partnership. And then exactly to your point, identifying a couple individuals who believed in the joint solution just individually and were willing to recommend it, even knowing that they weren't going to have that be part of their quota or their compensation or what have you. That they were doing it for hopefully because they thought we were decent human beings, but most importantly because they thought the customer was going to be more successful by having that as part of their solution. And then once that was successful, now you could start entering into and scaling that up with the rest of their team and then other teams. But it's always that, what are the case studies? Who have we worked with together before? Maybe it works well for others. It has not worked for us to just come in and say, okay, we all sat around the table and we agree that this is going to happen. So let's just roll it out to everybody. And now everyone's just going to go sell it. We have to go through those iterations to make it happen.
Right. Yeah, this is awesome. I think this has been super actionable, actually, for anyone that's listening that's trying to get into some of these like relationships with the larger software companies or providers, or that's looking to spend more of their energies like within the enterprise market. I think this has been super actionable to help them do that. Is there anything else that you wanted to discuss like on a top level that we haven't so far? We have a couple minutes left. I think this has been really great structure that we've gone through because it walks through where you guys started and where you're at now and the logical steps between that point. But is there anything where you're thinking, oh, I really would love to share this with people too?
I think the biggest thing that we've realized on the enterprise side, and it's the same with the smaller customers or the non-enterprise customers, is the success point as well. I think one of the things that we're actually proud of is I don't think if you would go out and ask really any of our customers how many people are on our team, they would give the number 3 for sure. They would even give a small number. And we want to make sure that's the case. It really shouldn't matter to them as long as we're there and supporting them and being reliable. And that's what we want to make sure we're continuing to do now and certainly into the future. And being able to then not shy away from those enterprise opportunities or use the team size as an excuse as to why we can't do that has been really valuable to us. And that was a big unlocking moment. And it always takes that first one, right? Holy moly, they're actually pleased. They're actually satisfied. This is working really well. And it's far bigger than many of our other customers, but it's the same tool and they're getting the most out of it. And they're actually one of our biggest promoters and sharers and being excited about utilizing it. We can actually do this. And all of those different puzzle pieces have made that happen. And so we've been excited now to continue to go down that path.
That's awesome. Yeah, this has been great. Scott, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing kind of you guys' story and approach to selling to the enterprise market without having your own enterprise sales team. I think it's been great. So yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it. If anyone wants to find out a bit more about UpContent, it's pretty straightforward. If they search for UpContent, they'll find you guys. And I'm sure if they have any questions, you'll be happy to connect with them on LinkedIn or anywhere like that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Looking forward to those conversations. Thanks for having me on.
No worries. I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Scott.
Thanks.